Okay, so in this video what we're going to do is I'm going to talk about the start of the downswing, and I'm going to talk about three areas. And the reason I'm going to talk about three areas is because amateur golfers have similar problems but differing problems, meaning if you play in a group of four, it's extremely unlikely that you all start the downswing the same way. Some of you might have traits where you steepen the club shaft, some of you might have traits where you don't rotate enough, some of you might have traits where you don't rotate correctly. So what I thought would be beneficial when we're talking about starting the downswing would be to talk about the three things that you have to do to start the downswing, should we say, theoretically correctly. Now, the big thing that you are ultimately trying to do, quite simply, to be able to play golf at any sort of level, is keep the golf club moving on plane. Now, I'm experiencing this very much firsthand at the moment. So for those of you that don't know, what I'm also doing is I'm documenting a journey of learning how to play left-handed. And my left-handed swing is considerably different to my right-handed swing in terms of it's completely lacking any sort of athleticism. However, we've got to start somewhere. And what I'm noticing where I am is that I'm not necessarily rotating very well in the downswing, but at the moment I'm trying to do the basics. And the first basic thing that you have to do is keep the golf club moving on plane. So an easy way to practice this, because it's something you can do at home, is you can just place an alignment stick on the ground, okay, like so, and then you can either hold your golf club, maybe grip down the club if your ceilings aren't as high. That's probably not a bad option. So if I hold halfway down the club here so it touches me on the lead hip, and then just use another alignment stick so it just extends out a little bit. So as I sort of swing back, we're not talking about the backswing, we're talking about the start of the downswing. Now what should happen as we start the downswing is, can you see the way that the alignment stick that's sticking out the end of the club here, it should travel in a line through my alignment stick that's on the floor, which is representing my target line. Now, doing this motion here is known as keeping the club on plane. It's acceptable for the club shaft to be more shallow, which means, can you see the way it's tracing very much a straight line, but on a more horizontal plane? But what's not acceptable is something that moves in a more vertical manner. If you start that downswing where that club shaft moves in a more steepening, more vertical manner, then you are going to struggle controlling your club path and controlling things like your club face, which basically means you're going to struggle to control how the club is striking the ball. So this, as a very simple drill, is something that you can sort of practice. If you're slightly uncertain of exactly how that club's supposed to move, then ultimately that's the first thing that you should be trying to do. Now, again, going back to my left-handed swing, at the moment, I'm not really moving, should we say, in the fastest and best kinematic sequence. But that's because it's not relative to me at the moment, in my opinion. I've got other basic things that I need to learn as fundamentals. So for many golfers who are struggling with getting the club moving down on plane, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that's your priority. I wouldn't start trying to massively trigger loads of rotation if you have an inability to do just that. Okay, so then the question would be, well, why would you struggle with plane? Well, possibly because you're not aware of it, which is why I think that drill can be quite useful, but also because maybe you don't know how to function, particularly the trail arm and the start of the downswing. So what I've got here is a bit of string or a bit of rope, lassoed it together at the end. I pop my head through it and put my lead arm through it, okay? And then I'm basically just going to hold it. So take the excess and hold it so it's about the length of if I was holding a 7-iron, so like so. So I'm going to remove the club and I'm just going to quite simply hold it like so. So you can see as I get set up here, I'm going to still mimic my normal setup position, but you can see the way that I'm keeping this string now relatively taut, right? So it's not like ridiculous like some sort of guitar, but it's not slack, okay? So the string now represents my left arm effectively. So in the backswing position, what should happen is that my right arm should move in such a way, and I should pivot my body in such a way, but see the way that, again, this is at the same resistance as it was in the setup position, meaning it's not ridiculously, plucking a string, but at the same token, it's definitely not collapsing. So the question would then be, what happens in the start of the downswing with the arm? Well, what we need to do is we need to maintain this, okay? So as I start my downswing, what I don't want to do is do something like this, where I just allow my upper arm to move to the side of my body, because obviously this collapses. But what we also don't want to do is I don't want to move in such a way where I maintain this widening motion on the string, but I move my upper arm like this. And the reason for that is because if I just reintroduce my alignment stick for a moment, you can see that that's the type of motion So although I'm keeping width, which is theoretically a good thing, you can see the way that the club shaft would be moving more vertical. So what you need to simultaneously do is allow your upper arm to move to the side of the body, okay, as you're simultaneously allowing this relationship here between my lower arm and my upper arm to widen. Does that make sense? So what we don't want to do is we don't want to move, give my arm a break for a second. What we don't want to do is we don't want to move this way, okay? We don't want to just move this way. What we want to do is move sort of this way and this way. Can you see? And I think that's why I would strongly suggest, as I do with a lot of my online students, you know, people that I don't get the chance to sort of see face to face and maybe sort of help get a bit of a feeling for these things. That's why I'd strongly suggest, you know, getting yourself a bit of string or a bit of rope and sort of practicing that type of motion where you're allowing the upper part of your arm to move to the side of your body as you're simultaneously allowing the relationship between the arm itself to straighten. Because by allowing it to straighten is applying a width, which is ultimately what we want. So if I just quickly carry that through, so it's here, and then see the way it's here and here, okay? But you obviously need your upper arm to move to the side of your body because it helps keep the golf club on plane as well. So those are a couple of the things that we desperately need, and I would say that's probably where most high handicapper golfers fail. They don't structure the arm very well, which is why they can't keep the club on plane. I'd probably say, obviously it's difficult to categorise, but most sort of maybe low mid handicappers and obviously elitist golfers tend to do okay with the arm structure. But what then tends to be the big difference is this sort of kinematic sequence, or if you like to oversimplify it today, good rotation of the body. So the reason and the benefit, and I think one of the best ways I can explain this really is, I don't want to go too much into the kinematic sequence, which basically means, you know, clearing the body, using the ground, pushing, because I think it goes a step too far. We'll come back to that in a separate conversation. But what I do want to talk about is the potential benefit of what rotating correctly offers you as opposed to if you don't rotate correctly. So to simply sort of demonstrate this, if I sort of place the club, I'm going to say through my sort of chest line, like so pretty much through my sternum, and I just sort of extend my arms and I'll swing towards you guys. If I rotate and I pivot my body so I keep my pelvis and chest turning, you can see the way I can keep the club moving through, like so, okay? So the club face stays, should we say, parallel towards my spine. However, if I don't do that and I don't move my chest and my arms have to move to the side of my body, can you see the difference that it causes? It causes a lack of stability of the face, so to speak. So the benefit, I think, eventually is learning to rotate will potentially add additional force, but what it also more importantly does is it gives you this capability to stabilize the club face, which can make a difference to your dispersion. And like I said, my left-handed swing at the moment is seriously lacking control of dispersion. Like I can hit maybe 2 in 10 pretty well, but the rest of them are hugely inconsistent. And some of that's through a lack of experience and a lack of awareness, but also some of it is obviously going to be very, very technical driven. And I'm very aware at the moment that my body is not doing anything in the start of the downswing. So the best way to sort of practice this, I would say, is to probably use some sort of object behind you at home. So you can quite simply just place a chair, start with the chair, 3 fingertips distance behind you, similar to what I'm demonstrating here with my vertical line, and just sort of practice in the backswing, get your right hip back up on the chair, and then as you start that downswing, get the feeling of pulling the left hip back onto the chair as you sort of continue to allow your weight to shift onto that lead foot, and just stay very much within your feet when you're doing this. So I'm not saying you ever want to move this way or this way. Try and keep your head still and just sort of stay within your ankle line when you're practicing this type of motion. And this is kind of what we're looking for, and this is how to rotate correctly. The big thing that you don't want to do, which is a very common problem, is sort of assume rotation is this. That sort of right hip forward standing up. It's definitely a left hip back type of motion for our right-handed golfers. Now, as my final little tip here on rotation, because again, it's something that I tend to see as a big problem, is that sometimes golfers become very experienced and you become understanding that you're supposed to start the downswing pulling this hip back, but then you still get a little stuck. So what I tend to do is, in my right-handed swing, you can see my lead foot is quite flared out. And the reason why it's quite flared out is quite simply because as I come in towards this through swing and this sort of hitting area, can you see the way the upper part of my leg continues to rotate towards the target? And the reason for that is it makes it easier for me to keep turning my chest and pelvis through. And often with quite a lot of students, this leg sort of stays too forward facing, which means you can't continue to rotate through and the hands start to overtake. So I think that's worth considering as well. Just getting that sort of feeling sometimes is a simple drill. Put your hands across the lower part of your stomach and just sort of practice continuing to rotate through. Allow this leg to stay, I'd say flex, particularly for this exercise, and just allow that upper part of that leg to feel like it moves through to the target with you. Okay, and then that way I think if you're somebody who's suffering with understanding how to keep rotating through the ball, you'll probably find that understanding the functionality of that lead leg will make quite a big difference. So hopefully this video sort of helps in terms of, you know, how you should start the downswing would very much depend on the level of golf you are and what you're trying to achieve. I would say if you sort of feel like you've got this ability and understand how to keep the club on plane, then what you want to start to do is obviously mess around with your pivot. However, my last point really on all of this is that what you will start to notice is that if you feel that you need to start working on your rotational motion in the golf swing, you are going to have to recalibrate what your arms are doing. So for example, if you start rotating your body better and you start maintaining what would be known as better hip depth, which means staying in contact with the chair, you might find that the feeling to keep the club on plane with your arms might be slightly different to that of previous. But that is something that obviously you can experiment with, either with help. I'm available, whether you want to work with or online or come to visit, or also obviously with your local pro who's obviously offering you advice on swing changes as well. Let me know how you get on. I'll see you guys again really soon.